What is up guys, PK here, and in today's video I'm gonna be explaining all of the underlying mechanics that go into the level 15 Stagger talents. Now, I know that I've talked about this before and essentially explained these very mechanics in several different videos, but I've noticed a couple of topics that people have been asking me about recurringly on my Discord server, and I think this is partially because these are things that I've explained in the context of a larger video, and thus they are problems that are not very searchable. You may sort of ask YouTube about how Stagger works, and that won't necessarily lead you to any of the videos in which I've explained it. And for that reason, there are 2, 3, maybe 4 different topics that I'm gonna cover in separate videos, despite the fact that these are topics that I have covered to some extent before. Anyways, with that said, let's get started. Alright, so first things first. In order to understand these Stagger talents, first we have to understand Stagger Count, which is why currently I have removed all of my talents, so at the moment there is no effect from Stagger talents. Now, Stagger Count, right? So a Stagger Count can be equal to 0, 1, and 2, okay? Now by default, that is to say, without any talents or any outside modifiers, a Stagger Count of 0 is equal to plus 0% damage, a Stagger Count of 1 is equal to plus 20% damage, and a Stagger Count of 2 is equal to plus 40% damage, okay? Now just to demonstrate that, let's take a look at this dummy here. So I'm gonna attack and cancel, right? Attack, cancel, see, attack, cancel, right? Now if I wait a while, 16.5 damage, right? But if I'm a little bit quicker, it goes to 19.75. That is because the light attack brings the Stagger Count to 1, giving it plus 20% in damage. Now if I were to do this twice, 23 damage. That is because I bring the Stagger Count to 2, giving it plus 40% damage. Okay? So you can see, if I were to wait a little bit here, the Stagger Count resets, and the damage goes back down to plus 0, plus 20, plus 40, right? So plus 0, plus 20, plus 40, okay? Now, certain attacks can set the Stagger Count straight to 2. An example of this would be the heavy attack from the spear here. Let's take a look at the spear. Now, if you check the difference in the cleave limit damage / stagger numbers here, you can see that the first heavy attack has way higher stagger power than the second heavy attack. Now, if I were to, for example, do the first heavy attack and then cancel, then do the same light attack we just used. Really? As you can see here, what that does is still deals 23 damage. Now the reason it deals 23 damage, as we know, that is Stagger Count equal to 2, right? So this heavy attack puts the dummy straight into Stagger 2. But what if we were to use the second heavy attack? Then cancel, then attack. Well, that was Stagger Count equal to 1. Right, but that is because of the differences in Stagger. So certain attacks will put you straight into Stagger 2, and other attacks will not, okay? So what you need to understand is that is the underlying principle that is underneath all of these talents, right? And that principle is still in play even with all of these talents. That is to say, the 0, 20, 40 is the default, right? So let's say we were to pick Smiter. First one, easiest to understand. So what it says is first enemy hit always counts as staggered. So what does that mean? Well, that's quite simple. You see, before we dealt 16.5 damage, and then we went up to the 19, right? But now, we start at 19.75, right? But if we go again, it's still 19.75. Now, why is that? That is because instead of 0, 20, and 40, Smiter gives you 20, 20, and 40. Whoops. Right? However, only for the first target, right? That means if I were to place 2 dummies here, right? Let's say that there are 2 dummies. If I were to do like this, for example, then the plus 20% would only apply to the first target. In other words, that dummy right there, okay? So if I were to take off Smiter here, as you can see, it changes the damage for the first dummy, but it does not change the damage for the second dummy. That is because Smiter only functions on the first enemy any given attack encounters, right? So in other words, what it does, it simply applies plus 20% damage to the first minion your attack encounters in any given scenario, whilst all other enemies that you encounter in the same attack are unaffected. So this is just a plus 20% damage bonus to the first enemy you hit, and thus it is useful for hitting certain one-shot breakpoints with an Executioner Sword, for example. That is when you want to go for Smiter. What about Mainstay? Well, Mainstay is even simpler to explain. Instead of the bonus being plus 0, plus 20, and plus 40, the bonus is instead plus 0, plus 40, and plus 60. Right, so let's give that a test. So you can see here the second attack is 23. That was Stagger Count 2 before, but now that's Stagger Count 1. Now the important difference here is that with Mainstay, there's a difference in all minions that you hit. In other words, here we're not just talking about the first enemy, we're talking about a difference across all of the enemies in that given attack, right? So if I were to take 2 dummies here and then start to attack both of them, the damage bonus would be active for both of them, right? If we were to remove it, see, the numbers are smaller on both sides. In other words, with Mainstay, you simply up the damage bonus that you obtain by increasing the stagger count. Now, this is great for weapons such as the two-handed hammer, for example. Why the two-handed hammer? Well, the two-handed hammer uses heavy attacks to cleave and can hit multiple armored minions. That means it's very likely to hit a wide array of enemy minions without actually killing them in the first strike. That means you're gonna do this heavy attack, boom, you stagger all the minions. Now the second heavy attack comes in, boom, you have plus 40% or plus 60%, I would assume in the case of the two-handed hammer most likely. Then boom, plus 60% on the next strike, giving you vastly more damage in cleaving scenarios. However, the single target obviously isn't as good. Or is it? You see, the interesting thing to note is really if you do the math, right? Smiter, plus 20, plus 20. That's how it starts out, then it's plus 40. Whereas Mainstay is plus 0, plus 40, then plus 60. What does that mean? Well, that means as soon as the second attack hits the enemy minion, they're equal in damage, which means Smiter is best for one-shotting things, right? So hitting a certain one-shot breakpoint is what Smiter is amazing at. Now, if we were to move on here to Enhance Power, right? So Enhance Power is sort of separate to all of the other Stagger talents. Why is that? Well, Enhance Power, theoretically speaking, does not affect your stagger bonus, right? Your stagger bonus here is still plus 0, plus 20, and plus 40. However, damage-wise, because you have Enhanced Power, which is a raw power buff that also applies to ranged attacks, which we'll get to later, that means really the first attack gets plus 7.5%. Now the second attack should get plus 20%, right? But really it's 20% multiplied by 7.5%, which is really a total of 29% in similar fashion with the last bonus, which is 40%, but because that also takes into account the 7.5, that's really 50.5%, right? So it does affect the damage you get from the stagger, but it's not because it affects the stagger mechanic, it's just the raw power that changes the damage numbers equal to 29 and 50.5, okay? And just to verify here, 1, 2, 3. Oops. You can see the numbers increase in the exact fashion we would assume. Now, what about ranged weapons, right? How does that work? Now, if we have no talents whatsoever, ranged stagger works exactly like Smiter's first target, except for all minions it encounters. In other words, when you take a range shot, if you look in here at the damage of a ranged attack, such as the longbow, right, then really the damage here on the first attack already gets a free 20% damage increase simply by being a ranged weapon. So ranged weapon always have 0 gives 20%, 1 gives 20%, and 2 gets 40%. Let's test out this hypothesis, right? So if we put a light attack here, see? And no matter how much we keep attacking here, 0, 1, 2, okay? Now, if we were to heavy attack, and then do an attack. That sets the stagger straight to 2, giving you the full bonus. Now, of course, enhanced power, being a raw power buff, affects this damage equally, so you still get that plus 7.5% on the first, which is then really total increase in damage of having enhanced power to your ranged weapon would be equal to 29%, 29%, and 50.5%. That's how that curve will look if we were to do light attacks. Okay? So far so good. So what about Bulwark? Well, Bulwark works exactly like the normal stagger. In other words, plus 0%, plus 20%, and plus 40% is still active with Bulwark, but the difference being with Bulwark, whenever you are staggering an enemy minion, as you can see, enemies that you stagger take 10% more damage from melee attacks for 2 seconds. That is to say, whenever you stagger a minion, you apply a debuff to that enemy minion that makes the enemy minion take 10% more damage from melee attacks regardless of the source. In other words, that is a debuff you apply to the enemy, and then even if your teammate were to hit him, he would still get that extra 10%. Now, what does that mean? Well, that means if you were to attack an enemy, the first would get plus 0% because stagger is equal to 0. Then at stagger equal to 1, well, you get the 20%, but you get 20% plus 10% damage, right? And then you have the final one, which is obviously, as we talked about, plus 40%, but it's plus 40% plus 10% damage, okay? So that's how that works. The strength here being that the 10% that you apply to the enemy minions simply by staggering them also works for your teammates. So this is great if you're using a shielded weapon such as this bash right here, right, which could apply this effect to multiple enemy minions at the same time, giving my teammates more DPS at the same time, okay? So that is sort of the strength of Bulwark. Lastly, we have Assassin. So how does Assassin work? Well, Assassin essentially works the exact same way having no talent does. That is to say, a normal body shot will always get 0, 20, and 40 equal to stagger count 0, 1, and 2. It's just that if you get either a critical hit or a headshot, then the bonus, regardless of the stagger count, will be plus 40%. And that is completely separate from the actual stagger count. So Assassin essentially gets the exact same damage modifiers that you get with no talent at all. It's just that any attack that is a critical hit or a headshot gets plus 40% regardless of the stagger count. Let's do a test here. Let's see. Okay, so normal attack here, 8.75. You can see that increases to 12.5 if I keep... Boom. Okay, so what about a headshot? How much does a headshot deal without Assassin? 18.5. What about with Assassin? 25. You see? So it completely disregards the stagger count because we are getting a headshot here. Now, the exact same thing is true if you were to go for a critical hit. Now, the reason it's 31 here is because it is a critical headshot, which in of itself has a different damage profile than just getting a headshot or just getting a critical hit. But you can see if we were to just attack here, 25.5 without Assassin, 18.25. In other words, we get the full 40% simply by performing a critical hit. And that's pretty much it. All in all, I think Assassin is the best performing stagger talent overall, since it allows you to sort of trigger a stagger equals 2 both on critical hits and on headshots. At the same time, it still has the function of stagger count 1 and 2, giving plus 20 and plus 40. I think Assassin is, like 99.9% of the time, I would pick Assassin over Smiter and Mainstay. Whereas I would often pick Mainstay over Smiter if you have a weapon that cleaves a lot, or a weapon such as the Billhook, for example, where you can instantly put the enemy into stagger equals 2. I would use Smiter for weapons like the Executioner Sword, or maybe the Cockhammer, or other weapons that sort of have high one-shot potential. Another example could be the Pickaxe for Slayer. Then of course we have Bulwark, which is primarily used for shielded weapons in order to stagger multiple enemies, apply that debuff, and help out the team as a whole. And lastly, we have enhanced power, which is primarily used to reach certain ranged breakpoints, usually specific ranged breakpoints, but can also be used sort of in combination with other raw power buffs, with which it would stack multiplicatively, sort of giving you the overall best value. And with that said, I hope that all makes sense. And yeah, hope you guys enjoyed today's video. If you did, please like, comment, and subscribe. And as always, I love you guys. Stay awesome. Peace out.
Stand not afraid. Kill all. Slay your paymasters.